Thank you very much, Blaise. So let me check if that is working great. You can hear me well? Good, super. So yeah, thanks for joining my keynote on from reactive to proactive risk mitigation. I will start off with a short introduction of Scoutbee. Won't talk too much about us, I promise. And I'll change sides so the speaker doesn't have a feedback. So we were founded in 2015 in a small town called Würzburg. We started off with the ambition to organize the world's data on suppliers. 2015 was then somewhat of a consulting gig in order to get us going. 2017 we had the first product to market. Total roughly $80 million investments, 440 employees across the globe. And yeah, backed by the best and smartest investors in my opinion. So what do we do? As I said, I won't talk too much about us, but just a thought, slide introduction. So we have a little bit of a font glitch here. But yeah, so we are actually offering Scoutbee intelligence and discovery, all of that actually based on a data foundation. I will talk a lot about the data foundation itself today. And most of you will probably know us from a supply discovery perspective. That is still one of our core products. What we have, however, rolled out recently at a couple of clients is actually our data foundation, and next to it, Wingate, the Scoutbee intelligence. Who are our clients? So across the board, we are not really having any business or industry vertical. It's from CPG to FMCG, small, medium-sized enterprises to large corporates and blue chips. Why is that? Well, because data and risk management is actually relevant for almost any company. And if you take a look at the amount of recent events, it's almost scary, from Fukushima to a global pandemic, to the Suez Canal blockage, Russia's war in Ukraine, trade wars between China and the US, tariffs and export regulations, all of that just came up in the last 5 to 10 years, right? So it's scary times. And if you are part of the 95% of the companies out there, you probably were surprised by those events. I was. And procurement back in the days and all supply chain management was mostly running behind the ball. No surprise, because they were rather, or had the need to invest actually in cost cutting and reducing the headcount, etc., instead of actually investing into a more strategic solution in order to become more proactive. All of the discussions we just recently also saw is also mentioning resilience. The one point that I want to stress out is resilience is not disaster response. Right? So resilience also means that you as a procurement or a supply chain company team also tackle the need for innovation or a new technology. Automotive, for example, for hydrogen cars right now. Or you are seeing the need for a new sustainable material for a certain product. All of that actually also has to be owned by procurement and supply chain. It's not only the tornado, the hurricane, or the nuclear disaster. And I would like to have a small thought experiment with you. Let's assume that you are running a car manufacturing company. You're the only car manufacturer in the world, right? That's a good place to be. And then there is a certain event. There's maybe Fukushima, there's a Suez Canal blockage whatsoever. What will happen to your business? Not much, right? So the market will still be there. You're the only car manufacturer in the world. Everything is fine. You don't actually have to invest too much in risk management or mitigation. That's not the case for most of the companies out there, right? So what is actually putting pressure on you as a procurement or supply chain organization is hence not the event itself, but actually your competition. So your competition being faster to market, being more advanced in managing those risks and having a better grip on tariffs and trade regulations, or maybe having a more sustainable supply chain. So all of those pieces are actually putting pressure on you. And that means for you, resilience actually means that you are acting fast and better than your competition. And if we see what the CPO of Siemens, Klaus Jobitzer, just recently said, is that every company has to ask themselves how to prepare for this new normal. And unfortunately, this will become the only true constant with all the recent drastic events, unfortunately. Then, when we look at the investments that is done actually in the procurement space, however, We see companies flourishing around contract management, about invoicing, process management, etc. Downstream, actually mostly reducing headcount and making processes more efficient in the procurement organization. Very little is actually going upstream, but upstream is the real driver for bottom line impact. So if you take a look into upstream, what it is, it's mostly two things. It's strategic analytics and it's strategic sourcing. And we call it intelligence and discovery. And looking at the recent, or if you take a look internally in your recent software procurement processes or the recent software that you have deployed, how many of those were actually focusing on getting your data right or intelligence right, or actually improving your strategic access to suppliers worldwide? Usually not much. Most of us, or most of the procurement teams out there, are still using phones and Google to find new suppliers, reach out to them, or they actually are still dependent on Excel sheets and dashboards distributed across different systems in order to get the right insight. And that's not fit for purpose anymore. So procurement is actually seeing a paradigm shift. Finally, it was about time. Procurement actually will become the business partner when it comes to a data foundation and a business foresight. And procurement actually has also the responsibility to be the innovation and sustainability engine. So if you look at, for example, Unilever, they have in total 5 million people working in their supply chain, and that is actually managed by procurement and supply chain management. Those are actually the brain capital that you have to maximize and you actually have to utilize. And that means procurement and supply chain has a much, much bigger responsibility than it had back in the days. It's not cost cutting anymore, it's actually value adding. Because of the access to all those different parties and actually the different players in your supply chain, you of course also have to orchestrate, you have to collaborate, and in the end also you have to be the internal disruptor and technology leader. It might sound bold and a lot of responsibility actually pushed towards supply chain and procurement, but in the end, just figuring that out, again, it's the one department that manages the most critical business relationship around the globe. And it's the one department that is managing almost all the spend that is actually happening on this planet. So the future, because of that, is proactive instead of reactive procurement. Now we get a little bit more techy, so bear with me. Your tools today are probably not fit for purpose, right? So the future of procurement is data first, that's for sure. So you can quote me on that hopefully in 2 to 3 years from now. Most of the investments that will happen in procurement are actually data driven. It's not about how is the UI looking, how is the process optimized, actually get your data right. However, most of the systems actually that have been built and are deployed today are actually technologies from the 90s or early 2000s. Not bad technology, very much needed, right? So all the process automation, invoice process management, etc. However, those are not built data first. They are built process first. However, if you take a look at the challenges that procurement today face, those are all data challenges, right? Barely anything of that is a process challenge. So competition actually with cheaper suppliers, how can you actually counter that? Well, of course, with automated negotiations, etc., but you won't move the needle here. You probably will get 2-3% out of that. Or competition with a more sustainable supply chain. You cannot process competitive advantage out of that. You actually need to invest in your data. And if you do it right, then you have ideally a resilient supply base based on better supply information, richer market information, easier supplier collaboration, and more alternative suppliers. How do you get there? How do you get the right data foundation in place? Well, first, also an open question to you, how is your data stored today? Won't call anyone out here. So maybe you think about right now it's distributed, not centralized, probably in Excel. I have that in my notebook. It's all of that. It has to be, I want to answer that a little bit more in a technology way. Your data is most likely stored in a so-called SQL database. It's a rigid database that is stored in tables. And that means that your data is very structured, very safe. The system is bulletproof. However, it's also very inflexible. And This way of storing data was also, again, invented in the early days and used by all the bigger companies like Oracle, SAP, and so on. It's absolutely the right thing to do, in particular if you have quite static data. As soon as you move into a more dynamic data setup, it's completely the wrong technology to use it for. The future are actually knowledge graphs. And those knowledge graphs are used today already, and you are facing that day by day. If you go to Amazon and you buy a new product, you get actually recommendations by knowledge graph. If you ask, hey Alexa, or hey Google, or hey Siri, however, I don't trigger any mobile phones now, those are then actually structured through a knowledge graph. And all of the big corporates that are technology leaders are using this technology, this knowledge graph. So what is it? What makes it so cool? So it's a different way of storing data. It's a so-called NoSQL way of storing data. And it is maybe coincidentally or with purpose, the perfect representation also of how supply chains are structured. It's actually showing the data in a kind of network. It's not focusing on the content only of a database, but actually on the relationship itself. So you can have, for example, here a certain supplier. A supplier has products. Products have other features, right? And suppliers produce products, suppliers have certificates, and so on. So you have those beautiful nodes, so-called. Those nodes have features. Just like you are also in the Facebook knowledge graph or in the Amazon knowledge graph, a node with features, so male, female, certain age. Have you looked for diapers just recently, right? So maybe you want to recommend a stroller to the person. So all of that actually gives a very good opportunity for Amazon to recommend the right products to you. For you as a procurement supply chain leader, storing the data gives you also those possibilities. Recommend alternative suppliers, recommend alternative actions, recommend suppliers that are flourishing or suppliers that have to be phased out of your business. So in a couple of years from now, most of the data when it comes to supply chain management will be most likely stored in a graph. It's the right thing to do. It's the one way to run also real AI and real machine learning, not PowerPoint AI, but real AI. And if you think about that from a completely different angle, procurement has one other major challenge these days, and that is talent, right? So acquiring talent and giving them actually a rigid database stored in Oracle or somewhere SAP, you won't get the top talent in the market. That won't happen. They won't join you. And that gives you a strategic disadvantage in the future. If you actually invest in a very advanced knowledge graph solution and give that access to, and give people access to that, you can actually get the top data scientists on the planet. And they love working with the latest tech. And this is actually also something that gives almost endless opportunities for you and your organization when it comes to deep supply chain insights or also I would say advanced AI, machine learning, and data science. Anything else I wanted to say here? No, I don't think so. So one thing I want to get across is also that you need to invest today in your data foundation, or very soon, for various reasons. One, you're right now seeing the procurement tech landscape expanding at a rapid speed. We all know this quadrant where all the startups are actually matched. When we founded the company in 2015, I think there were 7 or 8 players, and now there are 700, I think. It's crazy how active the ecosystem is. And that means, of course, for you as a company that is very much investing in those technologies, but maybe also planning to roll out the latest Coupa, SAP, Jagger solution, etc., you have to make sure that you have a data foundation right, because else you will run into plenty sunk cost phenomena. As I mentioned before, that's how we structure also our offering. We have the data foundation, so we are the ones that are structuring your data in the graph. We provide you access to alternative suppliers and also the Scorpio Intelligence solution to give you actually deep insights into your supply base. And if you do not have a top-notch data science analytics team, we also have the certain services to bridge that until you have them. And having that stored in a graph gives you also now plenty of possibilities, because what you know from a software perspective is the user front end. But the user front is actually not the difficult part to program or to develop. It's actually the background, and it's mostly actually the data. So applications that actually help you consolidate your suppliers, collaborate, discover and onboard, search, enrich with external data, all of that is much, much, much easier if you have a graph representation. And just as an example, if you then want to run a real supplier 360, we call it 360 because of 4 times 90 degrees, inside on your supplier, across your different ERP systems, 90 degrees from your World Wide Web, 90 degrees third-party data, and 90 degrees from our supplier data presentation or representation themselves through our supplier portal, for example. This is something that we today it would be quite difficult to do on a rigid SQL and on our old technology. With a graph representation, it's much, much easier. You can pull this data together with Lightspeed. And the very nice thing is also that if you have a new attractive third-party data, for example, about diversity, sustainability, CO2, whatsoever, it's much, much easier to integrate that. And just to leave or to phase out a little bit with some customer examples, how Unilever was using it. So Unilever used the data foundation and supplier discovery actually to get a strategic advantage. How did they do this? Where they increased their time to market, they reduced their time to market, increased the speed, and actually had the chance to identify 120 new collaborative manufacturers within a couple of months. And this gives them, of course, a clear benefit. And that is also a benefit in the sense of taking market share from your competition. Because if Unilever is able, in a global pandemic, to be providing hand sanitizers as one of the few companies out there, well, they will fill the shelves from Walmart and Costco, right? And probably not Johnson & Johnson. Siemens is using our technology to mostly also scout for new suppliers. The benefit here, again, using actually data in order to find new innovations and not being dependent on the knowledge of a singular procurement person. Or like this example, one of my most favorite examples is that one of our automotive customers was using the intelligence platform to structure the data and also get insights actually to new suppliers across the globe, and using that then to be the internal technology and innovation disruptor. How did they do that? They were, instead of simply listening to a specification for a certain part, there was a loudspeaker case, a loudspeaker blend, the metal blend that you know in your cars, that was handed back from the speaker manufacturer to the car manufacturer. They didn't use the specification, they simply handed out to the market. I helped them to identify 9 suppliers across the globe. 7 of them said the process that you are suggesting is the wrong one, here's the right one, and then you automatically don't get a massive savings, in that case $20 million over 5 years, but also have an 80% CO2 reduction. And then again, just to point this out, there was no R&D involved here. It was pure data play together with procurement know-how and come together as a real technology disruptor. And yeah, by doing so, procurement back into the driver's seat. Yeah, this comes from the heart. I think that procurement has a certain duty. We are managing almost 100% of the global spend when it comes to purchasing products across the globe. And procurement has to step out of the shadow and stop being this cost-cutting, process-driven organization. It has to be driven by purpose, people, and the planet. Purpose, of course, first and foremost, to make sure that your company targets are met, let it be profit or sustainability. But in the end, it's also a certain responsibility to take care about our people and our planet. And you cannot do this by optimizing your procure-to-pay process. You have to invest in your data, and you have to make sure that this is leading ideally to a strategic advantage. So you as a procurement team are getting the right attention internally. We believe in better data leads to better decisions for a better world. If you want to chat, of course, about our data foundation, our supplier intelligence or discovery platform, feel free to reach out. Or you can scan this, and then it will actually, for the lazy among us, already pre-write the email, and you simply have to click send. We also have a booth, just if you enter the room over there on the right side, at a very nice, noisy fan or heating system. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask them now. Thank you very much.
Excellent, please. Thank you, Gregor. That was brilliant. Really, really fascinating. We have questions coming in online. I have some of my own. I will always prefer in person first. If anybody is ready with one. No problem. Just let me know. Raise your hand if you do. Quickly, for those that don't know, can you explain what it means when you say most things are process first rather than data and data second? Yeah, the software that was or that has been developed over the last couple of decades was mostly process-driven in the sense of business processes, invoicing, supplier onboarding, etc. Data was not playing the content of it was not the main role when it comes to the software development. That led to, of course, a lot of very good solutions, but meaning that the process itself, the efficiency of the process flowing through the system was in focus. It was not about the quality of the decision, but rather the efficiency of the decision. Excellent. And following on from that, another question online. With the vast amount of data available on supply chain and procurement, how can companies be sure they're using the right data to drive value?
How they make sure that they're using...
Or what is the right data?
Yes. So there's nothing like too much data. I think the most important thing is that you have to build out a solid base that you can trust and build out from that. The challenge today is that, in particular on data, we have this hype cycle that is very extreme. So customers also today usually want like the ultimate solution that solves everything and has all data points available across the globe, or nothing. The two is probably somewhere in between. So you have to invest in a solid data foundation first and build out from that. What that is, that depends very much on like how clean your data is already internally, what data you are looking at. Is it more strategic data? Is it more specific data? Is it a third-party data provider like diversity data, etc.? I don't think that there's a golden bullet here for the answer, but what I can just point out, start with the data you trust. Add more and more trusted sources, because only if you have trusted data, that's also data that is used internally, and that's the only chance also how you can get internal usage and uptake.
Excellent. We have a direct question about ScoutBee now in. There are players out there with supplier insights to make procurement processes and agile and cost-saving measures. What makes ScoutBee different?
Depends, of course, to what player out there you compare us.
Yeah.
What we are focusing on is getting a holistic view on all relevant strategic procurement tasks. So we are not deploying the one singular solution that is then solving your risk situation or that is solving your sustainability situation. We are making sure that you have a data foundation that gives you easy access to any relevant data. And we are also super open to, for example, connect to any third-party data provider that has better data than we are having in order to give you the better solution. So from our perspective, this is the one offering difference that we have. What makes our data different is that we are the only company in the world that has actually run thousands or tens of thousands of sourcing cases. So we know what companies are looking for. We understand what's the difference between a CNC manufacturer that is providing CNC parts for Swarovski versus a CNC provider that is providing parts, for example, to automotive company. And this data was in the end finally enabling us also to have, in our mind, of course, the most advanced supplier data foundation.
Excellent. Does anybody have one here? That's fine, because they're flooding in online. So I think we can just quickly go through two more.
Okay.
One is, you mentioned organizations need to be investing today in their data foundations. Where is the best place to start? So I speak, of course, from a procurement and supply chain perspective. I think it's a very good start to organize your internal data. For example, what I just put out here on a supplier 360, or you cannot see it. To start displaying and actually making accessible the data that you already have, knowing what you know. that gives you usually already a high effect internally, and then make sure that you are focusing on a business case internally. Don't implement data because it's cool, but rather that you have also in the end a certain business target or bottom line impact directly, so that you are also winning the internal fight for budgets. And that's my recommendation.
And one final thing, this is actually from me, but going back to the beginning when you were talking about proactivity and you mentioned everything that's happened in the past decade, if you look at what, if you had looked at threat analyses, serious threat analyses about what could happen, pandemic was like number 1, nuclear accident was 3, natural disaster given. Do you think that now procurement and supply chain professionals should really be sitting down and listing, right, these are all the things that could happen and making a plan of action for each of them? Would you think that's the way forward?
Definitely. Of course, that is the way forward. So you have to have scenario planning. The thing is also with procurement, on a risk mitigation perspective, there are not too many options to do that, right? You can build out a second source. You can, of course, have certain grades of the second source that you have a running business with them. You've only identified them. You've onboarded them. You can build up stock, right? And you probably can find a better location for your suppliers. That's it. You don't have much more opportunities to de-risk your supply chain. I think right now it's definitely the right time to do the scenario planning, structure your data right, and make sure that you are prepared for the next event. Because again, like nobody could have expected that Russia puts such a brutal war on the Ukraine. Nobody would have expected that there's a global pandemic. So nobody can prepare for that. But you know the options that you have to counter them. And so it's about like making the right bets on the right areas of your supply chain and make sure that you are better prepared than your competition.
Excellent. Gregor Stuhler, thank you very much. Thank you.